Welcome to this Authors in Conversation panel featuring the 2021 Minnesota Book Awards finalists in the competitive young adult literature category. The Minnesota Book Awards is a program of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library in the organization's capacity as the Minnesota Center for the Book. This year's book awards are sponsored by Education Minnesota and the young adult literature category through the generosity of United Educators Credit Union. My name is Naomi Kritzer. I am a science fiction and fantasy writer from St. Paul, and in 2020, I won the Minnesota Book Award for YA Literature for my novel Catfishing on CatNet. As we get started, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Dakota people, indigenous keepers of the land on which many of us on this panel recording are zooming in from today. This land was reserved for the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed with the United States in 1851, and it remains sacred to them today. We also acknowledge the Ojibwe people, fellow indigenous inhabitants of this land. The Dakota and Ojibwe peoples are the original stewards of story in this place now called Minnesota. The Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, organizers of the Minnesota Book Awards, honor this tradition and the knowledge and values embedded in it as we work to lift up storytellers in our state. For this latest installment of the Minnesota Book Awards popular Meet the Finalists series, I am pleased to be joined by Laura Zimmermann, author of My Eyes Are Up Here, published by Dutton Books for Young Readers, part of Penguin Random House. Nicole Kronzer, author of Unscripted, published by Amulet, part of Abrams Books. Alison McGhee, author of Where We Are, published by Atheneum, Caitlyn Dlouhy Books, part of Simon & Schuster. And Carrie Mesrobian, author of The Whitsun Daughters, published by Dutton Books for Young Readers, part of Penguin Random House. Congratulations to each of you for the MMBA finalist nod. I have been in your shoes and know how exciting it is. In the interest of making the most of our short time together, I'm going to begin with a round robin question that I'd like each of you to respond to in turn. I'll then have a question specific to each of you and your finalist book. So my question for everyone today is, friendship, emotional intimacy, and the ways, small and large, that teenagers find to help and support their friends is a central theme in all the books. Can you talk about the role that friendship plays in your book and how you see friendship as a young adult author? Alison, would you like to start?
My novel, Where We Are, is set in the heart of Minneapolis, uptown, the neighborhood where I have lived for a long time. And the two stars are Sesame, who has just turned 18, and her boyfriend, Micah, who is 17. They are not only boyfriend and girlfriend, but they are also best friends. And when I was writing them into being, when I was spinning them up out of my brain, I went back to my own high school years. And in retrospect, it feels like such a lonely time, which is silly on one hand, because I had plenty of friends and I was involved in a million things. But when I think back, inside my heart and my mind, I was always wondering where my place in the world was. And when my very best friend, my lifelong best friend, moved to Florida, that opened up a sort of vast emptiness in terms of who I was and who knew me and how many people didn't seem to know me. And so the two teens in my book, Sesame and Micah, have found each other. It was one of those instant, I know you recognitions that happen in life and that are so beautiful and magical when they do happen. Sesame is truly alone in the world. The one person in her life who cared for her and was family was her grandmother, her adoptive grandmother, who died 2.5 years ago. And Micah is alone in the world because his parents have allowed themselves to be gradually brainwashed by a cult. And when Micah disappears because his parents and the cult have taken him, Sesame is truly alone. And so the bond of that love and friendship between them is the bright ribbon of hope that carries us throughout the novel. It's tense and it's a hard novel. There's always that love and that friendship there. Thanks.
Thank you. Carrie, would you like to speak next?
Sure, thank you. I really liked what Alison just said about the idea that you could be surrounded by people, but then just feel absolutely alone. And I remember feeling that way as well as a teenager. My novel, The Whitsun Daughters, is set in two places, 100 years in the past and in the present day. And there's not as many friends in this novel per se, but there are sisters who are sort of the world, bringing the world to each other. What I really was kind of focusing on in this story, because the main narrative takes place over a summer, and how in the summer, when the structure of school is removed and there's all sorts of different people, how you can fall into a group of friends or a setup, I guess. You're in interaction with people that you might not normally see. That would always happen getting a job, for example, or just being in different parts of town because you babysit in one neighborhood, and how the whole ecosystem of your friendship can change over those 3 months. And then when it's back to school, things are completely different. And so in this summer, there is in the Whitsun Daughters, the main characters are going through an unplanned pregnancy. They don't know what to do about it, and they're sort of allying themselves with people they wouldn't normally hang out with. And I kind of love that framework for a story, just having that, how summer can be sort of special and suspended in time, and it doesn't really count, and all the rules change, and then quickly they turn back to something different or the same when the structure of school and regular life comes in. So that's kind of how I think about it in terms of that novel. But definitely, I think the friendships are the family that the teenagers are trying to build. That's not the family they were given. And that can be a matter of survival, and it also can just be a matter of finding out who you are and who you want to be with as you grow.
Thank you. I really like your point about summer being a time that like really shakes up the boundaries between social circles, because it's a really interesting aspect of summer that is it's actually central to a number of books I've read. It's not, it's a really cool idea. Nicole, your book is set also during summer and has its own set of friendships that, but based in a summer camp. So would you like to speak next?
Yes, thank you. Boy, Alison and Carrie, what you've said has really resonated with me. Alison, that idea of that friendship is this ribbon of hope. I really love that. And yes, like you said, Carrie, just the shakeup of summer. My book, Unscripted, takes place at an improv summer camp in the mountains of Colorado. And my protagonist is a 17-year-old girl named Zelda who has Saturday Night Live dreams. And she feels like the best way for her to be able to achieve that dream is to go to this really exclusive improv summer camp. And so while she, her dream there then is to make the varsity team, right? Because then they put on this big show at the end of the 2 weeks. So when she gets there, she discovers she's only one of 5 girls in a 200-person camp. And suddenly friendship becomes even more important in her life than it even was. And she would consider her brother, Will, her best friend. They both go there together. But Will's boyfriend also comes, and it's a brand new relationship. And so this friend that she's really relied on in her regular life, like you were saying, Carrie, suddenly gets sort of tossed up in summer. He's off with Jonas, his boyfriend, a lot. And so she's sort of like left with these 4 girls wondering, how to sort of like make her way through this camp and if she can rely on these girls. And swiftly she realizes that she can, and she does. There's also another camp across the street. I really love camp, so one camp's not enough. And it's these Boy Scouts. And she becomes friends with these Boy Scouts, these 3 Boy Scouts, and they give her sort of the distance and the separation from sort of this focus on improv all the time. And I was a theater major and, a professional actor. And I remember meeting people in college who were not theater people. And it just felt like this breath of fresh air, I went to Stevens Point, Wisconsin for my undergrad, and I loved it there. And one of the things I loved about it was the focus on environmental education and like biology and the College of Natural Resources. And so I knew all these people that they cared about things that weren't auditions. And that was astonishing to me. And so when I set this book in this summer camp that was for theater, like it just felt natural for her to try to, to have some friends that were doing something outside of this thing that was so important to her. I really feel like, as when you're a teenager, like friendships become so important, and they become, Carrie, you said a little bit like this bridge to adulthood, right? Like this practice at being an adult, because somehow with other people your age, there's strength. And so this book, it's even she's like trying to fit in with this varsity group, right? And she can't, she doesn't. And she wants to be friends with them too. And so it becomes this vocabulary of fitting in and not fitting in. And then with that fitting in is feeling like sure about what you're doing, feeling confident. Like alone feels not confident. And then with someone else, even if neither of you know what you're doing, you don't know what you're doing together. And that really feels like teenaging. I've made up a verb. It really feels like being a teenager so much. If I have someone with me, then I feel like it's going to be okay.
Thank you. I like the verb teenaging. That's it's sort of like adulting, right? Like if adulting is a verb, then so is teenaging. Laura, now it's your turn. So go.
All right, thanks. Thanks to all of you. I have read all of your books, and I love how friendship works in all of your books, and place and time. And I just feel super grateful to be part of this group. I feel like Minnesotans really make great books. On the topic of friendship, I would say I believe that for the majority of teenagers, their non-romantic relationships are just infinitely more important than the romantic relationships that they have in their lives. So friends and best friends and siblings and peers are kind of, those are the pillars that hold up the adolescent universe. And so I really wanted to keep the focus on the friendships in the book that I wrote. So the main character, the narrator of my story, is a sophomore in high school. Her name is Greer, and she has lived most of her life in this sort of confident space of being good at stuff and being good at school and knowing her place in the world. And then over the course of the year or two before, her body changes pretty dramatically. And what ends up happening is that she ends up with these really large breasts. And so she feels suddenly super not confident, and she doesn't know exactly where she belongs in the world. So that's kind of the base thing that you need to know about the book if you don't know that already. But I think one of the things about adolescent friendships is that, they can be just beautiful and generous and caring, and also really complicated and evolving. And I wanted to give Greer some friends. I wanted to give her a couple of really good friends. So she's got her best friend, Maggie, who she's known forever, who knows her really well, but also pushes her in ways that she's not quite ready for. And then she's got a new friend, Jessa, who she meets when she joins the volleyball team. And Jessa's just a totally different person. And Jessa's got confidence in ways very different than Greer's confidence. Greer is very confident in everything she does in her head. And Jessa is a jock, and she's confident in everything she does in her body. And those are just really different. It's just a different set of experiences. So one of the things that I have observed about friendships among adolescent, especially girls, is also how physical they are. They're just, they touch each other, they braid each other's hair, they give each other stick and poke tattoos, and it's really delightful and awesome and very different, I think, than a lot of adult relationships. I have a 15-year-old daughter, and as with a lot of families, the pandemic rules at our house where you can see your friends outside, which worked okay until hell froze over, and then things have gotten ugly. But all fall, she'd have people come over with their laptops, and the idea was that they were still in school together, and they would just be on the patio, and they would be outside because they cared about community and they cared about safety. And then I would look outside and I'd be like, you guys are literally in the same lawn chair. Like there's 3 of you just piled on top of each other in a lawn chair. And like, that's, I mean, I have dear friends that I've known for 30 years. I wouldn't sit on any of them. I mean, now I kind of want to sit on some of them, but it's just it's a different thing. And it's part of what was worked really well in the book for me when Greer finds volleyball, because if you've ever watched women's volleyball, those women are handsy. So she is, one of the things that she finds is that kind of intimacy, that kind of safety with her friends, where she's, you know, at first she doesn't realize she's missed so much just human touch because she's been so uncomfortable in her body. But there's, you know, taping each other and massaging and braiding and writing on each other, and she is able to kind of relax into that, and that feeling of safety with her friends that I think she hadn't even realized hadn't been there until then.
The physicality of teenage girls is such an interesting observation, and it's so true. Like they're really like, they will cuddle each other and draw on each other, and it's just a, yeah. All right, thank you all for your responses. That was really interesting. So moving on to individual questions, I'm going to start with Nicole this time. Nicole, your bio mentions that you've worked as an actor and done improv, and I'm told you may have also worked at a summer camp. How did your experiences inform your story?
Yes, all of that is true. Yes, like I said before, I was a theater major as an undergrad, and I was a theater kid in high school. I was on my high school improv team, and that was in the 90s, and that was pretty unusual to have a high school improv team, but it's really where I fell in love with improv. When I went to college, I started an improv team with a number of friends, and we called ourselves Pirate Factory. So shout out there, Pirate Factory. And I'm still friends with them all. We all live in different parts of the world, but like it just became this really, really, sort of a found family, tight-knit group of people. And then when I graduated, I was a professional actor and improviser in the Twin Cities for about 5 years. And I taught improv to teenagers, and I taught improv to adults. And so when I sat down to write this book, it was, like I said, it was always there's just theater kids in all of my books. That's how I roll. Theater kids that's what I live and breathe. So, and then also, like the thing that I said about summer camp, there was just something I loved. Maybe it was like that little taste of independence where sure, there's all, 12 or 14 of you and you're in a cabin, but there's only one person in charge of you, and she's not much older than you are. And so it does feel like a little bit like being a grown up ahead of time, and also feeling like, I don't know, a pioneer or something, because you're outside a lot, and suddenly you're all going to the bathroom in another place with, 70 other people. I don't know. It was just like, oh, there's just so much adventure and there's so much drama too. So that definitely, those aspects of my life definitely affected me as I sat down to write this book. But the other part of my life is as a high school English teacher. And I suddenly, around 2016, 2017, I had a bunch of girls coming to me telling, so I should back up just a little bit. Like I'm very maternal, right? Like even as a brand new baby teacher, I was 26 when I started teaching. And one of my first classes called me Mama Kronz, like the whole year. Hugs are my love language. And so I have a lot of students that come to me and tell me things. And then, and I don't pretend to be a counselor. Sometimes I'm like, great, I'm going to email your counselor, and then I'm just going to make an appointment for you, and you're going to go see that person. But I get a lot of that sort of, I'm like the triage, you know what I mean? So I was having all these students coming to me, and they were telling me about these terrible boyfriends, and they were saying things like, oh, I don't know, he yells a lot, but then he always apologizes, and he says it's never going to happen again, but that's okay, right? Or like, he doesn't like it when I hang out with my friends anymore, but like, he's so great, so that's okay, right? And then I was like, no, you're in an emotionally abusive relationship. And they would be like, no, that doesn't happen to me. Like I'm in IB, like There was just this idea that like that couldn't possibly happen to them. And what I found myself wanting, oh, okay, wait, back up. So then also at that time, I'm teaching 12th grade and we're reading A Streetcar Named Desire. And in A Streetcar Named Desire, of course, you have Stanley, and he's this terribly abusive, both emotionally and physically, to his wife, Stella, and also to his sister-in-law, Blanche. And so, like, then as we were reading A Streetcar Named Desire, sometimes kids would come to me and be like, oh no, I'm Stella. And then I'd be like, and let me make an appointment with your counselor, right? And that would lead to that. What I was thinking about with these girls, and by the way, it's not just girls that end up in emotionally abusive relationships. This just happened to be the people that were coming to me. And I just was like, I just want a YA novel that I can like hand to them and be like, honey, you know, look, right? But also it just felt so right for Zelda to be that person as she's trying to fit in and you know, trying to like make her dreams come true. And then there's this gatekeeper man, right? He's 19, Ben is 19. And he is the thing that she sees that can open the door for her, but can also close the door what feels like forever. So this book is both of those things. And in fact, there used to be a whole scene where she reads A Streetcar Named Desire and then is like, oh my God, I'm Stella. And then my editor was like, so Nicole, this kind of reads like an English teacher wrote it. And I was like, me? What? And I have to tell you, like, I was so married to that scene. I had like 3 or 4 early readers that were like, maybe not the Streetcar Named Desire scene. And then even my agent was like, maybe not the Streetcar Named Desire scene. And I don't know, I'm like a very good listener, right? Like I'm like, oh, you tell me what to do and I will do that thing. I will follow the rules. Like that's how I roll. But for whatever reason, it took all the way to Maggie Lerman at Abrams to be like, I'm telling you, you have to change that Streetcar Named Desire scene. And so it's gone now. I changed it, but it took like 5 tries then. Then I kept sending that same chapter back to Maggie over and over, and she'd be like, cool, glad she's not reading the book, but can we get her outside? And then I'd like get her outside. She's like, cool, great that she's outside. Now she like, what now? What are you gonna do now? She has to come to this realization somehow. That was the hardest part of the book, but Streetcar got me there. Like it pushed me, and then I had to like get the rest of the way by myself. So those are the things, right? Theater kids, improv, A Streetcar Named Desire, and then my beloved teenage students who I just all want to be okay.
Thank you so much. That is particularly, I am fascinated to hear about the Streetcar Named Desire scene, because I think we all have scenes like that where we're like, I really like this, like I really want to keep this, and my editor's like, I don't think you really need this.
Yep, that is absolutely true. Yeah, and that's what I should do. I should like donate to this excellent cause, and you too can read the chapter that wasn't.
Yeah, you know, sometimes you can put up the outtakes on your website, like. But all right, Laura, are you? Do you want to go next? All right, so Laura, my question for you is: one of the central themes of the book is Greer learning how to advocate for herself, in contrast to her best friend, who is an extremely aggressive advocate for anything she thinks is important. Early in the book, Greer can't manage to ask for 5 minutes alone with her doctor. By the end, she's capable of saying out loud what she wants rather than projecting herself. Can you talk about the portrayal of self-advocacy in your book?
Sure. Thank you. That's a good and interesting question. I would say that in a lot of ways, up until we meet Greer, she hasn't really ever had to know how to advocate for herself. She's super smart, and she's super smart in the way that schools recognize as smart and teachers reward as being smart. So that's been pretty easy for her. And she's got a mom who's really involved in things. She's never had to move. Like things have gone pretty well for Greer up until this point. And then she reaches this point where her body suddenly just feels like it betrays her, and she feels awkward, and she feels embarrassed, and she feels ashamed, and she knows she shouldn't feel ashamed. So then she feels more ashamed, and all of her confidence that she's felt in all the other parts of her life has kind of disappeared. So she has a choice to make. She can either continue to just sort of hide. She wears this big giant sweatshirt all the time. She's just trying to hide and slouch and try to just get through high school without having to deal. And that seems to be the path that she's on. And except that she kind of encounters a couple things that then are really not accessible to her in that way. And one of them is that she discovers that she likes to play volleyball, and she's good at playing volleyball. And volleyball uniforms are rough if you don't feel awesome about how you look in a volleyball uniform. A lot of uniforms are that way. Hockey would be the direction you would point someone if you wanted to hide. And then also she meets this boy, Jackson, and he seems to kind of like her, and she's kind of pretty sure that he shouldn't. So she's got to make this decision about whether or not she's going to try to get the things that she needs, or whether she's just going to, continue to try to make herself invisible. So she follows this YouTube commentator who really feels much more empowered in her place in the world. And when people comment to this woman on YouTube and say things like, "Oh, have you ever thought about breast reduction surgery?" her response is something like, "Why should I want my boobs to be smaller? I just want the world to be bigger." And that is the place that I ultimately want Greer to get. So she's not, and it was always important to me that she doesn't achieve body positivity enlightenment. That isn't where she ends up. So if you start the book and you think, I can't wait for her to show up in math class, strutting in with a bustier, like that is going to be disappointing. She's not going to do that thing. But what I want her to be able to do is to demand what she needs in order to kind of live the life that she wants to live. So, at the beginning, she gets a volleyball uniform and she sees it as, I can't play volleyball. My body is wrong for this uniform. And what I want her to think, and what she ultimately, where she ultimately gets is, I am a volleyball player, so you'd better make me a uniform that will fit this body. And that's where I want her to be. And so she kind of, over the course of the book, gets a little bit louder and a little bit louder, and she does it in herself. So she's got friends who are really good examples to her, but nobody else stands up and does it for her. She ultimately does it for herself.
Thank you. I loved the portrayal of the volleyball team. I was not at all a jock in high school, but the her friendships with the teammates, and like the teammate who waits with her when she's waiting for her belated father, which is such a lovely scene. Okay, Carrie. So your book tackles a number of taboo topics: menstruation, sex with an age gap, abortion, and others. Did you set out deliberately to write about taboo topics, or did they arise organically as you told the story that you wanted to tell? Can you talk about the choices you made as a writer when approaching them?
I don't know how to really explain this. I was kind of messing around with this draft about these kids in a summer, and how summer has this sort of expansive quality, and how the rules, as I said, can be different for you for that moment. And one of my friends was reading a draft and said, this reminds me of The House of Bernarda Alba, which is a play by Federico Garcia Lorca, I believe. And I had never read that, and I'm not a theater person, so I had certainly never seen the play or acted in it. So I read it, and it was about this family of women that is waiting for this rich man to marry one of the daughters so that they can basically stay alive. None of them, it's like an old noble family, but they're running out of money, and none of the women can work because that would be beneath them, and they can't go get jobs because patriarchy or whatever. But it's a very hot summer, and all the sisters are kind of lying around in the house feeling oppressed by the heat. And my friend was like, just read that play and see what happens. And so I did, and there's a scene in Bernarda Alba, it's kind of referenced, it's just not enacted, where a local woman who gets pregnant due to a rape that occurs when some migrant farm workers come through the village, and they're angry about some sort of, they rape her and she gets pregnant. She gives birth to the baby and then buries it somewhere, and then the family dog digs it up and brings it back to their front step, bringing shame on her, right? And I was like, whoa, that's extremely awful on so many levels. It's very graphic. It's horrifying from the beginning to the end, and I that kind of stuck in my head. And then what happened is I used that text as a sort of kind of guardrail, went along through the story, thinking about how my story was like that and how it wasn't. And then things just started to happen. I have always wanted to write about teenagers who are not readers, who are not going to college, who maybe don't really want to think about their lives at a high intellectual level. That's probably not a great marketing choice, by the way, but those were the teenagers in this story as well. And then the age gap thing kind of happened by accident. Another thing I do enjoy putting in young adult novels is things that you wouldn't recommend to actual young adults in your life. But growing up, I remember and had experiences with people that were too old to be hanging out with the kids, and that the age level is something that kind of fluctuates. It's arbitrary. There's some kids at 18 who are ready to go off and do their thing, and there's some kids that aren't. And so that kind of boundary really interests me, and I like kind of meddling with it and tweaking that and making a big mess. I don't want to create lives that are exemplary or ones you could recommend. I don't want that. I think that's sort of boring. But it's different than the advice I would give actual adolescents in my life. So that's kind of where all of that comes from. Yeah.
Thank you. I was really struck reading this by the way the sexual encounters in the story were some of the realest that I've ever read in YA, just in terms of like, the combination of like awkwardness and arousal that a lot of kids feel in early sexual encounters. It just like it felt really spot on, and that was really pretty cool. So all right, Alison, one of the things that really struck me reading your book was how the city of Minneapolis is itself almost a character, one with a speaking role in the form of the notes. Can you talk about your portrayal of Minneapolis, your experiences of the city, and how you reinterpreted them through Sesame's eyes?
It's such a great question, and I'm so glad that you thought of Minneapolis as its own being in the book. All of my books are set profoundly in place and landscape. All my adult books are set in the landscape where I grew up in far upstate New York, the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains. And the characters who respond most deeply to those settings are usually people who spend a lot of time outdoors, in motion, usually walking. And that is directly related to my own life. When I was a teenager, I spent a lot of time outdoors. I built myself a tree house. I would wander through the woods. I would usually bring a book to my tree house. The solitary life when I was home. And I loved that. I loved that kind of roaming and the outdoors and time and space where I could just think or not think and let realizations come to me, I guess. And I also had a terrible eating disorder when I was a teen. And years later, I worked my way out of it literally by walking, just, 5 miles, 10 miles at a clip, and my body grew strong and I grew stronger. And a few years into that, I was done with that really difficult part of my adolescence. And so a lot of the power of walking and the outdoors and neighborhood is something I draw on when I'm writing, when I'm channeling these people, and when I'm creating the books. And so in terms of Minneapolis being a character in where we are, it absolutely is. It was a hard move for me to make when I was in my 20s to the city. And it took me a long time to feel at home in Minneapolis. And when I did, that feeling of being at home turned into an intense love of our city, and particularly neighborhood, which is Uptown. I've always lived there since I moved to Minneapolis. And I wanted my beloved Sesame and Micah to love the neighborhood the same way I do. And for me, that meant that I had to get them out in it all the time. So Sesame, a girl who is literally alone in the world once Micah has been abducted into this cult, she doesn't know where he is. No one else believes that he is in great danger, which he is. And so she knows it's up to her to find him. And so she sets out on a walking path every day in the bitterest of winter, which as Minnesotans, we all know a great deal about. And she walks all day, she walks every day looking for Micah, looking for any sign of where he might be. She has 2 clues to go on, and she looks throughout South Minneapolis. And as she walks, anyone who's a walker knows that you see your world and your neighborhood on a very human and animal level that you can't get from the window of a car. You can't get it from the window of a bus, even though Sesame and Micah are big on the bus. You can't even get it when you're on a bike. You get it when you are soaking up the soul of a neighborhood through the soles of your feet. And so as she roams around the neighborhood, Sesame over the years has built these little boxes that she slings around trees in alleys. And when you open them up, you can find poems. She is a girl who has been saved in large part by the poets of today, poets of the past, who reach out to her with words of comfort and guidance. She lives and breathes poetry. And so in order to form a connection with all the strangers she doesn't know in her neighborhood, she scrolls up poems and puts them in these boxes. And so in a way, they become the voice of the city, speaking back to anyone who opens one of those boxes and pulls out a poem left for them by this random person, Sesame. And I deliberately, along with that, I deliberately chose to set the novel in the heart of the heart of the heart of winter, a cold stretch like we often get, where it's not above freezing for weeks on end. And here is a girl whose boyfriend is gone, who is solely responsible for finding him. And every morning before dawn, she's layering up in all those layers we always put on, and she is heading out. And it's my hope that all the Minnesotans reading that book will feel their true northernness as they do. It's a love letter to my adoptive city. And it's a love letter to all us Northerners who thrive and respond to the changes of season the same way that Sesame and Micah do in the book.
Thank you. I love that. I've been walking a lot this year because, I wanted to get exercise and out of the house, and that was the pandemic safe option. So I've walked all winter, including some incredibly cold days this last month. Thanks to our tremendous young adult category finalists and to all of you watching for taking part in this Meet the Finalists panel. If you enjoyed this talk, you can find a treasure trove of past events archived on the YouTube channel of the Minnesota Book Awards steward organization, the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. You can find out more about future programs on their website, thefriends.org. In particular, mark your calendars for Thursday, April 29th. That's the evening that the winner of this literary category and 8 others will be revealed. It will be entirely online. Attendance is free, but registration is required. Visit thefriends.org/MNBA to reserve your spot.
Thank you, everyone, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.